Hey, what's up friends? Today I'll be showing you how to make a Techno bass line using Ableton and Serum. So let's get right into it, shall we? So let me play you the bass from this track. And now I'll unsolo it. This is my track called Mach 10, taking it back to my roots with some Psytrance, but with a little techno twist. And it's coming out on my label Groove Estate, and I'll put a link in the description below. Okay, so let me break this down. This is the entire low frequency group. It's all these tracks. Let's start with the kick, because that's arguably the most important part of the bass. So there's two layers to the kick. There's the main kick itself. This is just a sample that I found on a sample pack. And I'm doing some EQ and some light compression. So this EQ right here is to take out the low mids. It just makes the kick sound a bit tighter and less muddy. So here, listen to it without it. Now with it, just, really brings it in. And then I have a shelf here just to take out some of that really clicky frequencies. Because what I'm doing is, instead of using the high frequencies from this sample, I'm layering it with this hat. And that's what's adding that shimmer on top of the kick. So without it, and with it, makes a pretty big difference. And it really just makes it cut through the mix a lot better. And then I have this mid kick element here, but it's only playing on every other kick, almost like you would have a clap. So that's what that is. And that's just to add a bit more variation. And then I have a ghost kick up here just for the side chain. So this is muted. And if you see here, I have this delayed -10 milliseconds. If you've seen my videos before, I do this where I have the sidechain kick playing just before the actual kick, so it gives the compressor a little bit more time to react. And it allows the bass to be sidechained to the kick in a slightly more effective way. And all the kick elements are being grouped and sent to this drum bus. And the drum bus is on 100% wetness. It's got a little bit of drive, a little bit of crunch, and I'm dampening some of these high frequencies. And that really adds quite a bit of weight to the kick, as well as just tames the high frequencies. So here's without it. It's a lot more sharp and pokey. And this just makes it fat. And if you notice, I have this rumble bass grouped in here as well, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Now let's go over to the Serum bass. And this is the more stereotypically Psytrance part of this bass line. And this also consists of two layers, one primary layer, which is the main part of the bass, and then a sort of top layer, just adding a little bit of harmonics. Let's open up Serum and see what's going on. This is honestly a really simple bass line. All it is a saw wave and then another DS saw and triangle wave. You can honestly mix and match this oscillator B. Personally, I think you kind of need to have one oscillator just be a saw wave for it to sound full, and then you bring in another oscillator that's a little bit different just to add some texture to the sound, if that makes sense. So what's happening here is I have the envelope set to have a quick attack and a quick decay, so that's giving it that plucky sound. And of course the filter is also largely contributing to that pluckiness as well. So I have the filter set to a Moog low pass 12 dB filter, and then this LFO is modulating that filter. So check this out. I have the LFO set to envelope, so every time the note plays, the LFO gets triggered, and it's just bringing that cutoff frequency from high to low. And I have it sloping down here pretty quick, and that's giving it that plucky sound. If I bring it up, it's gonna get less plucky, but we don't want that. And then on the effects side, I just have a little bit of chorus. With, the mix is down to 6%. You don't want too much chorus on this, or else you're gonna lose a lot of the bass and you're gonna get way too much phasing issues. But I like to have just a bit of chorus to have some stereo width, because all these are just set to mono unison. Now let's talk about the effects, and this is important because you got to process the sound in a way to cut through the mix and also just be fat. So I'll turn off all the effects here and we'll just go through them one by one. So let's listen to just Serum. So that's just Serum. Now let's turn on Head Crusher. This is pretty important. I love this plugin because it's just a saturator plugin. It's a free plugin and it just adds so much like crunch and grit to the sound. I got this tone knob which is set about like what is that, like 2 o'clock? But yeah, if you have it set to 2 o'clock, it brings out some of those high frequencies, and I love that. Then I got a compressor. This is just taming those peaks. As you can see here with the compressor, all those little hits have this very sharp peak to them. So I'm just bringing that down ever so slightly with a quick attack and a quick release. And this EQ is cutting out some of those low mid frequencies. Again, that's where all the mud is. So listen to it without it. And then with it. And this will make more sense in the context of the track when you have a bunch of sounds like playing together at once. You know, that's where the low mids really tend to build up. So when you have this cut, it just gives that section of the frequency range a little bit more headroom and breathing room, and it'll just sound cleaner. Then I have a utility here just to cut it down 6 dB to fit it into the mix better. And then this plugin called BX Sub Filter. This is just adding some like low end weight to it because I felt that it was kind of lacking a bit, like below 50 Hertz. So if you hear it, it's pretty subtle, but it's all the way in the low end. And then I got another EQ. This is just doing a very soft shelf in the low frequency. It's just 1 dB. Again, just to get a little bit more weight in the low end for the big club systems. And I even have a little bit of reverb. I've put it into this audio effects rack, got some Valhalla. And this is just to make it sound a little bit bigger and give it some stereo width. As you can see here, I'm cutting out the low frequencies, everything below 400, and that's important because you don't want the sub bass to bleed into the reverb because that's going to make things muddy. So if you're putting the reverb on something with all that sub bass, definitely make sure to cut the lows out. Now let me play that without it. What I'm really looking for here is for those like high frequency, like the very like crunchy, gritty parts of the sound to pop with the reverb. And then I got some sidechain, of course, just sidechaining it to the ghost kick. And now on this layer, it's a very similar thing. The only difference is that it's pitched up an octave and I have a different shape here. Instead of the saw, I have whatever this is. I don't know what you would really, is that I guess it's kind of, no, it's not a sine wave. It's something. Yeah, it's pitched up an octave and then I'm just high passing all those low frequencies. You're just getting that like the buzzing sound. Without it. And then with it. Super subtle thing, but this is really just to help it cut through the mix just a little bit more. And here's the MIDI for this Psytrance bass. The track is in the key of E minor, so the root note is E, so that's pretty much most of the bass notes, and then some of the notes are in A. And this is playing essentially a 16th note pattern. Let's now move on to the more techno-y parts of the bass line, starting with this other Serum patch that I made. Let's listen to the context with everything. I guess this is sort of like a growl bass. I don't really know what you would call it. But again, this was made with Serum. Very similar preset to the last bass, as you can see. Saw wave and then the DS saw triangle. Only real difference here is that the envelope and the LFOs are a bit different. So I have a slower attack here, a longer decay. And then on here, instead of being sloped down like that, how it was before, I have a more linear slope. So that's what's giving it a bit of that slower nature to it, that growliness. And again, this LFO is still linked to the Moog low pass 12 filter. Processing wise, not really much going on here. I have Head Crusher still, same settings as the other one. But then I'm also just cutting out the low frequencies with the shelf. This is because you don't want both the sub basses competing too much. So I've shelved down the sub bass here by 7 dB, and I'm also gaining up the high frequencies by 6 dB because I want to hear that like grittiness. So then I have this, again, same concept here, pitching this up octave and then high passing everything below like 250 Hertz in this case. And that's allowing it to cut through the mix, especially on like smaller systems. In this bass, the notes are going between E and G instead of E and A like in the other bass. And of course, they're way more spaced out. This is not supposed to be the main bass line. So let me play that again. And now circling back to this rumble bass, because that's also a big part of giving that techno vibe. The rumble bass is just that sub floor that a lot of techno tracks have. It just, you know, gives the bass more of that rolling nature, because you just have this constant like 40, 50 Hertz playing. So for that, I just I found this loop and I modified it a bit. So check this out. I'm shaping the envelope here. This is the gain of the clip. And if I just turn this off, that's the original loop, but I didn't want the kick in it. So I'm just shaping the kick out. And there's not really too much processing happening here. I'm shifting this up by 3 Hertz just to put it into the key of the track. And I'm taking out a bit of 116 Hertz so it doesn't clash with the other bass lines that are happening. I really just want the subbiness here. And finally, to conclude this bass line, there's one more loop that I have playing, just giving it a bit more groove. Some little pluckiness, but it actually adds quite a bit of groove to this bass line. Without it, it hits in a nice spot with the offbeat of those plucks. And here as well, not much processing, just some EQ to cut out the low frequencies, a little dip at the mid, and then also some of the highs. Got a sidechain to the kick, and then some reverb. This is the same reverb that I was using on that other Psytrance bass. And that concludes the tutorial. If it was helpful, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.